Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to today's webinar in the RSA Professional Development webinar series. Thank you for joining us. My name is Daniela and I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at the Regional Studies Association. Today's professional development webinar is the final in a series of 3 webinars that's organized between the Regional Studies Association and the Young Academics Network of the Association of European Planning Schools, or AESOP. Focus on the 3 webinars is on navigating career success in the transition period from being a PhD student to become an early career researcher. Today's session is on mental health and well-being in academia and has been developed by the Young Academics Network of the Association of European Planning Schools. And let me welcome today's session co-moderator and lead of this webinar, Rumeysa Ceylan. Rumeysa is assistant professor at the Istanbul Technical University and part of the AESOP Young Academics Network coordination team. Welcome, Rumeysa. The floor is yours to introduce AESOP.
Thank you so much, Daniela. I will share my screen for my presentation. Thank you, Daniela, again, for setting the scene and this fruitful collaboration between 2 associations. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Rumeysa, an assistant professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Istanbul Technical University. My current research areas encompass climate change, smart communities, sustainable energy transition, and behavioral change. Additionally, I serve as a member of the coordination team for the AESOP Young Academics Network, which is facilitating valuable connections and collaborations within the academic community. The Association of European Schools of Planning, AESOP in short, has been promoting excellence in planning education and research since 1987. AESOP has built an incredible network of planners around the world, and now having 250 institutional members and 50 individual members. As for the Young Academics Network, we are a branch of AESOP, founded in 2003, which encourages the active participation and exchange of academic work from master students to postdocs and those starting out in academic positions. And the Young Academics Network provides a platform through which the academic leaders of tomorrow can share ideas in an open and inclusive environment, challenging and supporting one another in the attainment of superior academic output. The Young Academics Network has 2 core aims. One of them is creating a network of young academics and the organization of activities, facilitating access to AESOP structures and voicing the young academics' needs within AESOP. Actually, you can find us online on various platforms, including our official website, where you can subscribe for free, become a member, create a profile, take part in the young academics elections, start networking. Additionally, we actively engage with our community on social media platforms such as LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can stay updated on upcoming events and join in on a conversation. As you can see from the slide, you can feel free to connect with us and be part of our vibrant community. Since 2007, we have constantly upheld the tradition of hosting the Young Academics Conference, and just last month, we successfully co-organized the 18th Young Academic Conference titled Bridging the Gaps, Urban Planning for Coexistence, in collaboration with PhD students in Politecnico di Milano. So the opportunities are endless. We are also pleased that AESOP Young Academics has teamed up with the regional studies associations to deliver 3 webinars as part of the RSA's professional development webinar series, specifically designed for PhD students and early career researchers. 2 of these webinars have already taken place. The recording can now be viewed on RSA website. And these sessions are crafted to delve into the 3 pressing issues pivotal for navigating career success, and we hope you enjoy and benefit from all of them. Thank you, and I will give the floor to Daniela again.
Hello, thank you, Rumeysa. Thank you for this. We will see you again later on in this webinar. Let me now share my screen to do a quick overview on the RSA. So we are a global network, interdisciplinary global network for regional research, development and policy. Our members are researchers, policymakers and planners. We currently have members in 80 countries. Let me do this. I have this quote here, which I used at one of the previous webinars in this small series as well. A great predictor of career success is membership of an open network. I think this doesn't just apply to career progression. By being part of a network, you hear about opportunities, you're on the pulse, you get to know people, you can network, but it's also about finding your tribe, finding a belonging, a group where you feel at home. And this can be RSA, this can be AESOP, this can be other organizations that work on a research topic that you are interested in, or this could even be a sports club or whatever. To find your tribe is key. And today we're talking about mental health, and there will be a presentation later on that talks about belonging. And I think that's important to keep in mind, that networks can be a place of belonging. So the RSA, we do a number of things. On this slide, you see all the different aspects that we're doing. We're doing conferences and events, networks, publishing, portfolio. We have 6 journals, 2 book series, 1 blog and 1 magazine. We are involved in knowledge exchange and policy engagement, particularly via our European Foundation, RSA Europe. We do trainings and capacity building activities, and we fund research and award excellence. Following, I shall just quickly focus on our support in regards to conferences and events and networks for PhD students and early careers. So we run an annual PhD and early career conference. This year's conference is held in Cambridge. It's still time to submit your paper if you're interested in this one. Will be a small scale conference, a very supportive environment where you get feedback on your research and where you can network amongst other PhD students and early career researchers. We also have an annual RSA Europe Summer College for PhD students and early career researchers. The next one will be held in May at the Gran Sasso Institute in L'Aquila in Italy. We do offer early career plenary speaker competitions. We've been doing this for many years now, and it's an opportunity to be a plenary speaker at a high profile conference. And it's very good for your CV, and you get, of course, all the benefits that come with being a plenary speaker. We also offer conference bursaries for our conferences. These are free conference places, so it's always good to keep an eye open for these. And together with RSA Europe, we run 5 webinar series at the moment. They are all free to attend live. And one of those webinar series is the Professional Development Webinar Series, which is this one, where this webinar is part of. And this series covers a wide variety of career development related topics, from academic publishing to CV writing, interview skills, and so on. It's well worth checking out. Lastly, I have on this slide our session that's called Right Here, Right Now. They usually happen in the autumn. That's our nod to Fatboy Slim. And these sessions are 2 hours long, and people come together to get on with a piece of writing that otherwise they might avoid to work on. So there is the peer pressure, but there's also a networking event element to it, and it's really popular. And we hear some feedback we had. So there's a buddy system, and it helps to concentrate, it helps to focus and get on with work that you have been avoiding. So this is, again, a tribe that you could join. There should be new sessions in the autumn. Regarding networks, we have a PhD and an early career representative on the RSA board who represent the PhD and early career community on the board and their views. We have a PhD and early career Facebook group. We have a very active network for early career and mid-career women in regional studies and regional science. They have also a Facebook group, or also the WhatsApp group is very active. We have territorial networks. We are, as I said, we have members in 80 countries. So we have divisions, for example, in Latin America or in Northern Europe. We have country sections, for example, in Poland, Hungary, Ireland, and we have country ambassadors and English branches. They organize regularly events, and again, an opportunity to find your tribe, your network. We also have 11 funded research networks. These are networks focusing on a certain topic. They organize events that are funded by the RSA and free to attend. And again, well worth having a look at the topics they cover. You might find something that's in line with your work. And finally, if you're not signed up to our monthly e-bulletin, that's our newsletter, then I encourage you to use the QR code or go via the web link to sign up to this. This is where we share all the latest information, anything that's coming up and any opportunity. And I wish you good luck finding your tribe. So this is short presentation on the RSA. I shall now give you some information on housekeeping. So this webinar will be recorded and will be made available on the RSA Lounge. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and let us know from where in the world you're joining. Please put in the chat box from where in the world you're joining us and give us a quick hello. If you are on X, formerly known as Twitter, please use hashtag RSA webinar to tweet about this event. So that's enough from me. I shall hand over to Rumeysa again. Thank you.
I will start with our first speaker. I would like to introduce Cassie Hazell. She's a lecturer in clinical psychology at the University of Surrey. She completed her PhD at the University of Sussex on the topic of guided self-help for people distressed by hearing voices. She has since completed a postdoctoral position at the University of Sussex, Sussex Partnership and NSA Foundation Trust, Brighton and Sussex Medical School, and the University of Oxford, all in the area of mental health and mostly working on clinical trials. Dr. Hazell was the co-lead researcher on the UDOC project, the largest survey ever conducted on the mental health of PhD students. So Cassie, the floor is yours. You can share your screen, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. So my name is Cassie Hazell. I'm currently based at the University of Surrey, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the UDOC project, which stands for Understanding the Mental Health of Doctoral Researchers. Just a heads up in terms of kind of looking after ourselves. There is some content in this presentation which does relate to suicide. So this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the project, and I'm happy to share kind of links and further information outside of this if it's helpful. But the UDOC project was funded by the Office for Students, and our aim was to try and develop an evidence base around the kind of the nature and the size of the problem related to the mental health of doctoral researchers. and begin to think about ways in which we can intervene. We were very fortunate that during the project we were able to complete a large number of research outputs looking at different aspects of mental health and using different kind of methodologies. And I'm just going to pick out some of the kind of key findings that have attracted the most attention from our work. So we did a systematic review. I think one of the things that we took from this actually was that there were lots of little pockets of research, but it was actually quite hard to synthesize it together. The only kind of like quantitative data we were able to bring together was around kind of stress levels. And we found that stress levels were significantly higher amongst PGRs than kind of population norm data. So I think with our research, a lot of it, when I present it, does sound a bit like common sense, but this kind of common sense hasn't been documented until now, which it's really important to kind of evidence-based these kind of anecdotal stories that we hear in academia. We did an online survey, and within this, we kind of asked PhD students some like true or false questions. And you can see the green numbers here reflecting those that said the statement was true for them. I think the ones I want to draw your attention to here is kind of 42% of PhD students saying that they've thought about taking a break from their studies because of their mental health. And kind of 42% thinking that developing a mental health problem is the norm during your PhD. And I find that quite upsetting because it's a training program for academia, but it shouldn't be a test of your kind of mental resilience and kind of well-being. Within that same survey, we conducted some data on kind of mental health outcomes, and we found that levels of depression and anxiety were significantly higher in PhD students than our matched control group of working professionals. And we should say this was quite a large study, so we're talking about kind of over 3,000 UK PhD students here, compared to a control group that were actually more kind of mentally more unwell than kind of population norm data. So even against kind of a working professionals group that were more depressed and more anxious than we would expect to see, unfortunately, PhD students were still scoring higher. And in terms of meeting thresholds for what we would call kind of a need for care, so requiring some kind of intervention, we can see here that kind of nearly 42% of PGRs were meeting criteria for moderate to severe depression, 40% for moderate to severe anxiety. And perhaps one of the most concerning findings from our survey was that 35% of PhD students were meeting criteria for being at risk of future suicide. And that number is even more upsetting when we consider, again, population norm data on that same outcome. You would expect about kind of 0.6%. So the risk is much higher amongst these PGRs that we surveyed. Our survey used a mixed methods approach, and we've done quite a few kind of qualitative studies from this research. And I think one of the take-home things that runs across all of them is this idea that the PhD itself and life outside of PhD studies can be both harmful and protective. So I think a key message that we try to get across is that it's not all doom and gloom when doing a PhD, and for lots of people, it's actually a real positive thing for their mental health, and gives people purpose and direction. But for others, it is quite a stressful and distressing experience. And equally, life outside of your PhD can be brilliant and be protective and supportive. But PhD students are humans too, and unfortunately, we can all experience difficult times in our life, and that can have an impact on your ability to focus on your PhD. We tried to look at potential risk factors and correlates of some of these mental health outcomes. And again, this is kind of synthesizing across a few studies now, but we found that the most consistent predictors of poor mental health amongst PGRs is perfectionism, loneliness, lack of communion with your supervisor, and imposter feelings. So these may kind of resonate with you and kind of your peers. And I do think a lot of this research is kind of putting common sense out there, but it's important for us to evidence this, and this potentially provides ways in which we might be able to intervene, so potential intervention targets. That's some kind of points from our research, but we've kind of had some lessons learned, I think, through this, from listening to PGRs themselves and looking at our findings about what supervisors can do, but also what PGRs can do to try and look after themselves while doing their PhD. I don't think there are any kind of supervisors on the call, but you will hopefully be future supervisors, so something for you to think about. Making sure that you know kind of what support is available at your university and locally. A key message that we got from PGRs was that they don't need supervisors to be kind of quasi-therapists, but they should be able to signpost to people that can provide support. And that's kind of key in this idea of kind of listening and acknowledging, but not trying to treat. I think as academics currently and kind of future independent researchers, it's really important to develop your own healthy working habits and model those to others so that we can help address the kind of toxic culture that can exist sometimes in academia of overworking. I'm mindful of time. I'll leave this up there, but just to move on to kind of what PGRs can do and kind of early career researchers is to think about self-care. And I know that's a bit of a wishy-washy term that gets bandied about a lot, but it is really important. Making sure you're eating, making sure you're getting fresh air, exercising, not losing your other interests outside of your studies and work. Because that will help you kind of create this work-life balance and in creating a working structure, because I think a PhD has the potential to become quite boundless. And people can be working very long hours because there's a deadline, but it's quite far in the future. So imposing your own structure. And related to that, making sure you use annual and sick leave, and helping to create a kinder academy by kind of looking out for each other, challenging any examples of mental health stigma that you witness. Celebrating your successes, I think, is so important, especially maybe if you've got a supervisor that's not necessarily facilitating that for you, kind of taking ownership of that. One thing that I think is most important actually is keeping your connections outside of academia. Academia is a very strange environment, and there are ways in which it works that are so different and distinct from any other kind of working environment. And having connections outside of that academic bubble can help give you a bit of a reality check when you're kind of working in ways that might be considered kind of toxic working practices. And yeah, most importantly, make sure you seek help if you need it. It's not an indication of failure or that you're not up to the job. It's self-care and self-preservation. Here's some kind of key references of some of our work. And that's kind of everything from me on this. Obviously, I could pick up on some of the stuff in questions, but hopefully there's something there that you found helpful, and I'll hand back to Rumeysa.
Thank you so much, Casey, for this valuable presentation, and thank you for sharing your insights with us. We will now move forward with David's presentation. David Watson, prior to working at the University of Essex, and David Watson was an associate professor at Norwich Business School from 2017 and 2023, and worked as a senior researcher associate on the Work, Learning and Wellbeing Evidence Program for the Economic and Social Research Council, funded What Works Wellbeing Center. He is an experienced qualitative researcher with training in both quantitative and qualitative methods. He has worked on research projects in a number of settings, including social movements, community organizations, and with vulnerable groups in deprived areas. He has experience of working in a number of settings outside academia, including local government and the third sector. Thank you, David.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rumeysa, for that introduction, and thanks to the RSA for the opportunity to talk today about some research that I've been involved with looking at PGR, mental health and well-being. So the content of my presentation today is based on a review, and that's now published as an academic publication, which I'll provide a link to later on, that was undertaken as part of some of the funded work that I know Cassie's been involved with, looking at PGR wellbeing, but this was undertaken whilst I was working at the University of East Anglia, and linked to the What Works Wellbeing Centre that I did some work with for a number of years, where we did a series of systematic reviews. And the content today is focused on a review I carried out with John Turnpenny, who was the lead for that Courage project at UEA. That was a project that looked at wellbeing more widely within the university, and particularly at PGR wellbeing experiences. And the review that forms the basis for the content of today's presentation was also there to inform that work, really. So just to pick up a little bit where Cassie left off, I suppose, as she sort of hinted, there's some challenges sometimes with understanding the scale and the depth of the problem with PGR wellbeing, partly because of the nature of PGR study. We're talking about quite small groups of people in lots of different contexts experiencing some different challenges. But what we found when looking at the literature around PGR wellbeing is that there is quite a lot of evidence out there around sort of likely risk factors that contribute to poor experiences of mental health and well-being. And some of these Cassie already alluded to. So, the pressures of doctoral research and that kind of slightly worrying trend of the normalization of it being seen as a stressful experience, but also supervisory relationships. We know that these are key in terms of how students are experiencing their period of study and whether it's detrimental to their health and well-being. Financial concerns, obviously there's a range of different conditions that people experience when they're doing their PhD, whether they've got funded scholarship, whether it's part-time, etc., whether it's being combined with paid work, and these can add to that burden. Cassie talked about the very sort of specific context of academic work, and how PGR study can feel quite unstructured, so issues around workload and control. And there are also issues around harassment as well, and some other factors that we picked up within the literature. But that wasn't the main focus of our review, because we felt that there was, although arguably this body of research could be extended, we felt that there was a sense of that already in the literature. I think there's a strong case for doing more research with PGRs, because I think this is still a group that's under-researched, and there is a kind of a focus more on dropout traditionally and success in terms of PhD completion rather than success in terms of well-being. And there isn't a good understanding of the link between those two, or that hasn't been as widely acknowledged or explored. But what we felt that there was really lacking, and what we wanted in terms of the Courage project at UEA, was some kind of understanding of what sort of interventions might be successful to address some of those factors that were impacting PGR wellbeing. And that's really what the What Works Centre for Wellbeing was about, is about doing reviews to understand what might be effective in influencing people's wellbeing. So it had an intervention focus, and that's what we looked at within this project. So this is our sort of fundamental question that we were seeking to answer. What's the effectiveness of different interventions, practices and institutional arrangements in supporting PGR mental health? The reason that we didn't limit ourselves just to interventions is that we expected that we wouldn't find a large body of research out there that really addresses this question from an intervention point of view. So we wanted to pick up on potentially more informal practices and other kind of institutional arrangements that might be important, just to kind of broaden the potential amount of literature we might capture. In terms of the methods, it was a systematic review, but slightly more streamlined because it was informing a project. So we applied rapid review methods, so rigorous and systematic, but streamlined. You know, we used search terms to look through a number of databases with keyword terms, and then we looked through our results. Myself and John compared our findings and reduced down the pool of literature to the ones that we felt most directly answered the question, with a view to finding what works, what were the kind of gaps that were still remaining in knowledge, and what might be the practical implications for institutions and departments and supervisors and PGRs themselves. So, as I've already kind of hinted, it's not a huge body of literature out there that's looking at this. Actually, when we initially carried out the searches, we had fewer studies than what we ended up including in the published review, because we reran the searches after we'd completed the initial ones, and we found more studies. So I think that does indicate that it's an area of research that people are doing more work to try and understand what can be effective. But even so, it's still relatively small. Within those studies, that captured the experiences of around 1,000 students, only 30 or so staff members, mainly supervisors, and then 11 recent graduates, so part of that kind of student body as well. Most of the studies we looked at were qualitative or mixed methods. In terms of the quantitative studies, they tended to be cross-sectional or retrospective, so not methods that would give us very secure knowledge of what works effectively, not longitudinal and not quantitative designs like RCTs that would be very strong in understanding particular mechanisms or interventions. So the evidence base is relatively small and relatively low quality. But having said that, we still felt the review was useful. And this model that we produced as a result of the review is not intended to be sort of comprehensive, but it is supposed to synthesize what we found from the studies in the review. So I'm not suggesting that PGR wellbeing is only related to these things and these are the only important kind of mechanisms going on, but actually that this is what we found through the studies we reviewed. So we sort of divided the focus of the interventions and the practices that we reviewed into 4 areas, but there is some overlap between these. So I'll explain that in a bit more detail when I talk about them. But these are the 4 areas that we picked out as being the most important areas where we found interventions and practices that were shown to be effective in supporting PhD students' mental health and well-being. It is a bit difficult to separate out the outcomes because of overlapping mechanisms. So coaching and mentoring approaches might also feed into different sort of student communities depending on the basis of those mentoring approaches. So, for example, one of the studies was a mentoring program for students from a particular ethnic background. Whilst the kind of mentoring itself was quite effective, it also created a kind of community of students who were being mentored, and they had a community that they could draw on each other as a source of support, as well as the mentors. And similarly with the supervisory relationship, we know that's important, but also one of those studies looked at a form of group supervision and the effectiveness of that as a way of creating a kind of sort of micro community of PhD students as well. So as I said, in terms of the factors, the structure and quality of the working relationship between PGRs and the supervisors is a key causal factor that influences PGR wellbeing. What we found was studies that looked at interventions here try to develop better forms of communication and better relational qualities between supervisors and their students. And this led to more confidence and more autonomy for the student, but also sometimes a form of emotional support, which is not something that necessarily is explicitly kind of written into that supervisory contract, but often this was what was really important for PGR's well-being. Looking at the area of psychological resources, which is perhaps the one that stands out as being most directly relevant to mental health, we know that the independent nature of PGR study can create isolation, and presents challenges for self-management and self-motivation. So the need for sort of PGRs to develop resilience and skills to be able to thrive and progress individually was important. So we had a number of different studies that evaluated programs looking at building psychological and emotional resources, but there is some overlap here with the area of personal and professional skills. So things like time management and being able to succeed, problem solving with kind of areas of difficulty within the research itself, links to this kind of area of psychological resources. And you also had examples of PGR students drawing on peers and friends as well to maintain their psychological well-being. So that crosses over into community to some extent as well. The personal and professional skills, I think it feeds into what Cassie was saying around some of those risk factors about developing this sense of academic identity and having confidence in yourself as an academic, getting over imposter syndrome. But it also sometimes supported the development of community where those programs of professional skills were cohort based and brought students together. And then the community area, although it's an area of its own, so there are things like social events, shared spaces that physical spaces that can build PGR community, and also digital spaces. It could also be underpinned by some of the other areas as well. So I won't go into too much more detail because it's explained a lot more in the paper. I just want to come on to the last element. So I think I won't spend too much time on this slide either, because I think I've talked about some of the implications from it. But these are the areas where we would expect institutions to be looking at how they might improve things. So are they facilitating the development of that PGR community? And that can be done in a number of ways. What digital tools and spaces for support are there? Dedicated mental health support, but also preventative strategies like resilience training or even time management training that supports some of those skills that are linked to well-being. And obviously the training for supervisors and potentially for supervisors and students, and peer support and mentoring. The other thing that the review looks at is barriers to implementation. So although we might know what some of the risk factors are and what some of the likely interventions are, this might not necessarily lead to a transformation of practice, because there's sometimes a lack of appreciation of the barriers that might be faced in translating what is a good idea for an intervention and has evidence that supports that it'll be effective into actual changes in practice. So if we think about barriers at 3 levels, we might think that there are barriers in a systemic sense. So what are the kind of norms and goals in relation to PGR study? What are higher education institutions there for? What are the organizational level barriers, procedures, management structures that might interfere with how an intervention is transferred into practice? And what barriers might exist at an individual level? There might be individuals involved in the intervention design or those who are accessing the intervention. And I think the simplest way to sort of think through these barriers is to think through an example. So this is an example that we look at in the paper. So if we imagine a specific intervention like mental health awareness training for supervisors, the use of a new planning tool to provide a clear structure and align expectations in a supervisory working relationship, or group supervisory meetings. These are all studies that we reviewed in the paper. There might be a number of barriers at the individual level that might inhibit those interventions, that intervention from translating into good practice. So supervisors might already have very specific ideas about how they should manage PGRs. They might not see mental health as core to their role. And PGRs themselves as individuals might not see supervisors as someone that they would or should approach about that. Organizationally, supervisors might not have the time allocated to undertake some of this training that supports this kind of relationship. And more senior staff in the university might think that actually well-being is already supported at an institutional level, so there's not a need for it. And then there's the kind of wider context that might see PGR study being more about completion and producing world-class research rather than being focused on mental health and well-being. And we put forward some ideas about how you might address that barrier. So in terms of today's talk, I think it's interesting to reflect on your own environments and think about what you might be experiencing and how some of these barriers might be addressed. So could this be resolved through discussion sessions between supervisors and PGRs, awareness sessions maybe for students on what supervisors' role is in relation to wellbeing. Could the training be developed and piloted with supervisors being able to incorporate ideas into a new planning tool and then reviewed at a kind of departmental level? So the publication provides a lot more detail on some of the things I've talked about today. It is available as an open access publication, so if you want to access that, you can. And there's also a review summary that's more plain English if you want something a bit more digestible and quick to look through. Sorry. So I'm very conscious of time and not taking up too much of it. So I'll end there. And I think we'll have time for some questions at the end. But thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, very happy to pick up any questions.
Thank you so much, David, for your valuable contribution to today's discussion. Now we will move forward with Charlotte's presentation, but firstly, let me introduce briefly Charlotte. Charlotte Morris is a senior lecturer in education and sociology at the University of Portsmouth in UK. And she has research interest in higher education, relationships, gender, sexuality, and intersectional inequalities. She previously taught across sociology, education, and gender studies at the University of Sussex, where she completed a PhD Gender Studies in the Department of Sociology. She has also held posts as a research fellow with the Center for Higher Education and Equity Research, and as a researcher in the field of learning and teaching in higher education at Anglia Ruskin University and University of Brighton. She has led projects in the field of widening participation, undergraduate and postgraduate learning, student disabilities, mental health and well-being, student parents and careers, and experiences of early career women academics. So floor is yours, Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction and the invitation to talk to you today. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm just sharing my screen, so hopefully everyone can see that okay. Do, by the way, tell me if I start going over time, because it would be good to have a bit of space at the end for questions for everybody. So, sorry. So I'm just going to go through, introduce myself a little bit more in terms of my background in student, postgraduate, early career wellbeing, give an overview of some of the research I've done in this area, and then I'm really going to hone in on the theme of belonging in relation to wellbeing, because this was one of the most central themes that has come out across mine and others' work. And then there'll be a few key take-home points, hopefully at the end. So wellbeing has been a really important strand across my academic career so far. I've been a researcher on various projects looking at student mental health and wellbeing in particular. And I was lead researcher on a 3-year project looking at doctoral learning journeys. So we really noticed that there were some huge wellbeing challenges affecting a lot of the participants in that study. And we wanted to go on and discover a bit more about this. So we got funding to do a further project which focused specifically on postgraduate wellbeing. I was doing my PhD alongside this, and I've done various different research and teaching roles and also student support role. So that's been another opportunity to really think about wellbeing and gain insights from students, including postgraduates. I was also very involved at my university in terms of peer-led wellbeing initiatives. And more recently, I've been involved in my own university in contributing to a set of peer-led workshops, so supporting them, and also running workshops as part of the graduate school programme for students and supervisors. And my most recent research, which I'm writing about now, is thinking about some of the challenges around the early career, and especially in relation to job insecurity. So just to give you a quick overview of these studies, while these studies are a little bit older, I was able to revisit some of this data more recently and write about this theme of belonging in relation to well-being, which was published a couple of years ago. So the first project was following the learning journeys of over 30 arts, social sciences and humanities doctoral researchers over a 2-year period. So this involved in-depth interviews, which were repeated with the same people, so it was longitudinal, and also there were written reflections on some of their moments where they felt they were learning. We also conducted surveys and interviews with supervisors and examiners to get their perspectives. Then we moved on to thinking about the well-being of postgraduate students, specifically in education, and that involved 3 institutional case studies. We conducted focus groups and interviews with students and staff, and a survey of over 200 postgraduate researchers. So this is the data that I've come back to more recently, because it's hard to believe it, but at the time there seemed to be a limited interest in this topic. But then in the past 5 years in particular, everyone's really interested in it again. So this is what brought me back to it. So one of the central themes that came out in terms of the many different well-being challenges for postgraduate researchers was that of isolation. And many of the participants were explicitly making this connection. So one here is saying that it really affects your health. I think we're social animals, but in this situation, we're expected to be very individualized, and people struggle with that. And saying you really need to talk to people about your ideas, hear back from them about what they think about your ideas. And if you don't have that, it can impact your well-being and can lead to bouts of depression for some people. So this really encapsulates how experiencing isolation can really have a serious impact. And so we started thinking about it in terms of belonging and recognizing how important a sense of belonging to a community of peers, to the department and institution, and also the wider academic community is so key for so many different aspects of research and well-being. And this included having a sense of being valued, feeling like you had a positive contribution to make, and also having a clear status. Because I think identity can sometimes be a struggle for both postgraduate researchers and people in the early career, because you're sometimes wondering where you fit into the institution and the hierarchy. So it's really important to be recognised and have your voice heard, and to feel like you have some control over your environment. We also really explicitly linked this with inequalities, which has sometimes previously been missed out of the wellbeing research. So we were finding there were particular gendered, class, racialized effects. There were particular impacts for people with caring responsibilities, or around age and disability, or about being an international student, or about your professional status. Because many people might be academics, but also doing a PhD at the same time. Some people might have come from a different professional background where they're seen as highly experienced and knowledgeable, and then suddenly find that they're at the bottom of a hierarchy and may be read as not being particularly knowledgeable. And we wrote about how universities and departments, as well as scholars themselves, have a crucial role to play in nurturing a very positive, inclusive academic culture. And we can all be part of creating that sort of culture. So cohort learning was found to be very valuable, having those social opportunities and that support from peers. Peer mentoring and group supervisions were seen as potential ways forward to enhance community belonging and achievement. And of course, going into the early career, it's really important to take with you some of those friends and buddies and peers that you've made throughout a doctoral learning journey. And I know for me, I've remained lifelong friends with some of my writing buddies, and we still write and connect and do work together. So it's really important to hang on to the community that you do start to build during that phase. So I feel this participant really encapsulated for me how crucial developing community and belonging is, because we're so used to thinking about an academic career as being something that's very individual. We might have that idea of an academic as somebody who's on their own studying in their ivory tower. But this research has said that actually it involves a collective offering of knowledge. Sometimes you might have to bowl on your own. So this idea that sometimes we might have to do things in isolation, and sometimes a PhD in particular can feel weighted towards that. However, actually, it's taking part in a big conversation with other researchers. It's about your data, your participants, the relationships you build with your supervisors and peers. It's about the conferences and the people you correspond with. So actually, it's not a solo act, it's a collective offering of knowledge. So maybe we can think about it more in those terms, and think about it in terms of research more broadly. So maybe a shift in culture is needed to prevent that sort of social isolation. It's also really important to connect up with peers and have a good support network and sense of belonging to different communities, so that you're aware that it's not just you. This researcher has said it makes them recognise it's not just me going through some of these challenges and experiences. So it normalises having those some of those challenges and well-being issues. And they also alluded to the importance of space. So belonging is very spatialised, and it's important that people have spaces where they can meet and identify with others and have those conversations. And someone here said it's about the importance of being able to safely let off steam sometimes. But it's also been identified not just about making us feel good, but about being such an enriching part of the learning process itself, being able to share your ideas and have them challenged and critiqued. And it can really help to build confidence and hone those skills the more you're able to do that. And that's another thing that's really key in the early career as well, engaging in those wider conversations. So participants felt that an inclusive academic culture which nurtured confidence through collegiality, a valuing of them and their research, really helped with belonging. Supervisors played a really key role in facilitating networking, so they could be gatekeepers, they could introduce students to peers and colleagues and key people in the field and advise them on what conferences they could go to. It was really helpful when they could get support, such as financial support for attending conferences and other events. It was really helpful when where there were forums for their voices to be heard, and they felt that they were being listened to by their department and institution. Spaces we've talked about quite a bit, and also fostering more positive, non-hierarchical, integrated and fulfilling research cultures. So seeing doctoral researchers and other postgraduate researchers is very much part of the life of the department and the institution, rather than looking at them separately. So this, I think, is just about my last slide because I'm conscious of time, but this is something I share when I'm running wellbeing workshops, and I talk a bit about the importance of community. And it goes back right to the beginning when Daniela was talking about finding your tribe, because this is true for doctoral researchers and people in the early career. These might be people in your immediate cohort, the people you share offices with, people you go along to training sessions with. It might also be your wider disciplinary community. So it's really important to start networking, reaching out to people whose work you're interested in, seeing what relevant events might be going on. It's important to take part in events and training that's on offer as part of your academic school or faculty or institution, because that can be a great way to meet people from other disciplines as well and make connections. And also thinking about the wider doctoral researcher community, like I say, in the early career, keeping in touch with some of those valuable contacts you've made. So also looking out for wider national and international organisations that can support you in your research and your journey, thinking about which research centres you could connect up with, thinking about conferences, professional bodies and networks, and also thinking about online opportunities for communities and support. So this is really a central part of an academic journey, which makes it much more pleasurable and meaningful and really helps to build confidence and that feeling of belonging and making that shift towards seeing yourself as an academic and building your own academic identity and voice. So that is all for me. I'm going to stop sharing there, and hopefully I haven't gone too much over time.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Actually, your presentation has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for that once again. As one of the moderators of today's webinar, I would like to extend my thanks to our presenters, Cassie, Charlotte, and David. Actually, I have learned a lot from your expertise, which has enriched our discussions, and I have collected some questions from the Q&A box. But before we delve into the Q&A sessions, I would like to extend a sincere apologize on behalf of Daniela for the technical difficulties she encountered. We understand that the challenges of virtual presentations, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. Now, I would like to open the floor for questions and discussions from our audience. David, if it is okay for you, we can start with you. I think you need to leave earlier.
Yeah, I'll be very brief because I put a detailed answer in the Q&A box. So the question was around the time period in which we looked at studies. It was approximately 2000 to 2018, just because of when the review was completed and the updated searches were completed. I think it would be interesting to look at the effect of the pandemic, and I would expect it to be quite bad, knowing what I know about supervising PhD students directly, and just some of the experiences that they had in terms of interrupted field study, and just heightening the sense of isolation that we already know is a risk factor for PGRs. So I'll leave it there because I've put a more detailed answer in the chat, because I know there's some other questions for Cassie as well there.
Okay, thank you so much, David, for your answer. We don't have so much time, so I will skip to the another question. This question is for Cassie from Yulia Kiseleva. What accounts for the difference in PhD experience between a good PhD experience and a bad one? Is it possible to tell? Why do PGRs feel and describe their PhD experiences the way they do? How you done research on that, Cassie?
Okay, that's a really great question, and a lot of questions as well. One thing just to pick up on related to David and the kind of pandemic, Nicola Byram at King's College London did do a project around the effects of the pandemic on PhD students specifically. So if you're interested in that, you can kind of read her work. But in terms of what determines a good PhD versus a not so good one, I think though for us, like going by our research, it would be the kind of presence of some of those risk factors and the absence of some of the protective factors. So if you've got a supervisory relationship that is difficult and tense and is not kind of collaborative, that's going to have an impact on your PhD. if you are isolated and also feel lonely. I think it's really important to separate those, because you can have a lot of actual physical networks and people around you and still feel kind of isolated and lonely. So bye David. Yeah, that feeling of loneliness, and that kind of relates to kind of Charlotte's work, I think is really key, and loneliness within academia but also outside of that. And then some of those kind of like personality traits can help feed into some of the unhealthy working habits. So things like perfectionism, imposter syndrome can kind of precipitate unhealthy working habits, which we then know are kind of bad for your mental health. So there's a few different factors there. It's not really a nice simple answer, I'm afraid. And some of those things are within your control and some of those things are outside of your control. But I think it's just trying to do what you can in your capacity to look after yourself and kind of build your community, and remembering that the PhD is not the be all and end all. You are more than your PhD, and life is bigger than your PhD. And if it's for you, great, and it kind of goes well, but it's not everything in your life. And I think that balance can be quite helpful and refreshing, because it doesn't always feel like that.
Thank you so much for your valuable answer, Casey. And now I would like to address our final question to you, Charlotte. In your presentation, you emphasize the value of inclusive academic cultures. What specific actions can supervisors and academic leaders take to cultivate such cultures within their departments or institutions?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. Well, I think it's important, first of all, to really make sure that the postgraduate community is involved in any departmental events and meetings as much as possible, making sure that there is a forum of some sort to make sure that their voices are heard. And they're very much part of contributing to the development of the research culture. I think research centres and research groups can be really important nurturing environments. Sometimes these can be a little bit overly targeted towards faculty, and I think it's important to make sure that postgraduate researchers are invited to them, and that their needs are also considered as part of this, but also really taking wider inequalities into consideration. So thinking about the length and timing of events and making sure that it's inclusive, for example, for people who might have disabilities or caring responsibilities. People often have to go at 2:30 to collect children. So I try and make events either lunchtime or twilight sessions, just to be as inclusive as possible to carers, and just making sure that everyone is consulted as much as possible, to make sure their needs are taken into account. Because often inclusive practice is very much directed towards the undergraduate population, but it's also really important that we're thinking about postgraduate researchers and academic peers as well. So I think we can all be part of developing this culture from the ground up, as well as making sure that we're putting pressure on senior managers to make sure that they're being inclusive in their policies.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for your insightful comments, actually. As we gradually come to end, I would like to thank again all our speakers, Casey, Charlotte, and David, for your time and your very full of knowledge presentations and your responses as well. For more information, you can check both RSA and AESOP Young Academics Network websites. And thank you for your time and for your participation. Goodbye all.